بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak to you all, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you during this blessed month. And inshallah, we want to continue in our delve into the Quran during this blessed month of Ramadan, Shahr Quran, the month of the Quran. And inshallah, today we're going to be looking a little bit differently than what we've usually done. Usually we've more or less focused on one particular ayah of the Quran for the different ajzat. Today we will pay a closer attention to one of the ayats within the 12th ajzat, because this is the 12th day of Ramadan. However, we're going to be talking a little bit more in general in regards to the surah of Surah Yūsuf, which the majority of the surah happens within the 12 juz. And so this is a juz, or should I say this is a surah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells the story of Yusuf more or less in a linear fashion. And that typically what we see in the Quran is that it doesn't necessarily tell stories in a linear fashion, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will possibly mention some aspects of a story and some portions of a surah, and then He'll mention other aspects within the other parts of the surah. However, in this particular case, Surah Yūsuf, it's pretty much the entire story of Joseph in terms of the main aspect of Joseph's life. And so the thing that we can take away from this particular surah is, as his father Yaqub had said, and he actually said it more than once within the same surah, is this aspect of sabrun jameel. That this is a chapter of how a person is supposed to have, as it can literally be translated, beautiful patience. And so this is something that we see from Yaqub as well as Yusuf alayhi salam, that both of them were tried with trials that for many of us we could not even fathom the feelings that we would have in that type of situation. And this is something that both of them had knowledge was going to be the case. So for example, Yaqub, when Yusuf alayhi salam initially tells his father about the dream that he had, about seeing the stars and the sun and the moon prostrating to him, the first thing that Yaqub says to his son is, do not tell your brothers. So Yaqub could already see that unfortunately Shaitan was going to place an aspect of jealousy within the hearts of the brothers of Yusuf, and so Yaqub was trying to protect his son from the jealousies that would be had by his brothers. And when we get to Yusuf alayhi salam, after his brothers have cast him out into the well and he's sold to the person in Egypt, then Yusuf is in a situation where he's just going through trial after trial. And all the while, he's only striving to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so throughout this though, one of the things that we do not see from either Yaqub or from Yusuf alayhi salam is complaining. The closest that we see to it is that Yaqub alayhi salam, he says that he's going to seek his comfort from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is the aspect of sabr and jameel, a quote unquote beautiful patience. It's this aspect of, I'm going through this trial that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed me in, but it's never going to affect how I look at my Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. That ultimately I know that my Lord is going to bring me out of this situation. Even with Yusuf alayhi salam being placed into a prison, and then after that in the Quran it actually mentions that he was made to stay in that prison for bid'a sinin, for some years. After he had already been placed in prison, and the two men had come into the prison and Yusuf had interpreted their dreams, and he told the one to inform the king about a situation, and that person forgot. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that he remained in the prison for bid'a sinin, for some years. And with the Mufassirin, some of them, they actually give numbers to how many years that is. And for the most part, they say more or less that the minimum amount of time is 7 years. That for trying to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not giving in to the temptation of his mistress, and having the courage and the strength to be able to keep himself from falling into a severe act of disobedience, he is placed in prison for at least 7+ years. And so, again, many of us can't even fathom having some situation like that. But the reason why this story is such a powerful story is because it's a representation of the life that we live as people going through the different trials and tests that we will go through. That some of them are going to be bitter, some of them are going to be hurtful, some of them are going to come from the very people that we expect to look out for our best interests, but really they're not. And some of them will last for years upon end. But at the end of all of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not left us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not unaware of what we're going through. And as long as we're able to uphold this sabrun jameel, this beautiful patience, meaning that it never takes me away from my relationship with my Lord and my responsibilities to my Lord, fulfilling His commands and avoiding His prohibitions, that inshaAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring me out of it. And that's only from the standpoint of this dunya, let alone what will be inshaAllah waiting for us in the akhirah. And the story of Yūsuf alayhi salam is a beautiful testament to that. Because again, this entire story is nothing more than trial after trial after trial. You know, how many of us can imagine losing our child and more or less knowing that it's our other children who caused for one of our children to be lost, and having to live with that for a number of years? And how many of us can imagine being separated from our beloved parents and our siblings, you know, to whatever, you know, relationship we may have with them, and having to go through this for years and then placed into bondage and then being accused of something that is completely outside of your character and then being punished essentially for that, and so on and so forth, in terms of all the different trials that they have gone through. But still, at the end of all of that, they still place their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is how they can come to the point that towards the end of the story, which is more or less what we see in the 13th juz of the Quran and the continuation of the Surah Yūsuf, is that even after all that, they are willing to forgive. That Yūsuf alayhi salam and his father Yaqub alayhi salam, they were willing to forgive Yusuf was willing to forgive his brothers. Yaqub was willing to forgive his sons. And they actually sought istighfar. They actually sought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness for them. And so this is the hallmark of an example for us, is that this is what it truly means to be a person that puts their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we don't hold grudges with other people. That we never think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has abandoned us. That we always go back to our primary source of strength and comfort, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what I usually refer people to when they are going through extremely difficult trials, is that oftentimes I will tell them, read Surah Yūsuf. Because it's a reminder of the reality that just because we are striving to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't mean that our life is necessarily going to be an easy road to walk. But as long as we respond to these difficulties in a manner that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring us out of it. It may not necessarily be in the time that we want it to be or that we think it should be, but ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one who brought us to it, and He was the one that will be able to get us through it. And as we said, if we're able to do this in this temporary world that we live in, that inshallah there'll be even a greater reward for us in the akhirah that never ends. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who reflect upon this beautiful story of Surah Yūsuf. And actually there are many translations of commentaries, of lessons of Surah Yūsuf, just because how powerful this particular surah is. And I say that in reference to acknowledging that the entire Quran is powerful, that the entire Quran is alim, it's tremendous. It's just that with Surah Yūsuf, it can be more or less a practical example of how we live out the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the different trials and tribulations that we face in this life. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who have this sabr and jameel, this beautiful patience. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who He allows to see the ultimate benefit of keeping up our relationship with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam wa asbana wa ni'ma wakil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
When you feel all alone in this world and there's nobody to count your tears, just remember no matter where you are, Allah knows.